Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 65 of the White Knuckle podcast, powered by Ozonics. Undetectable, undeniable. Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning back into the White Knuckle podcast, episode number 65. This is actually episode number 1 in a series of 5, 6, maybe even 7 episodes on public land hunting. Today, we have featured Jared Scheffler from Whitetail Adrenaline. Many of you probably know who Jared is, and he probably doesn't need a whole lot of an introduction, so I won't spend a ton of time on it. I had a ton of fun doing this interview. Jared's really, really fun to talk to and definitely captivating. Just his style alone is something that I could listen to for quite some time. So his interview, however, is going to be different than the rest that we do. We've provided a map to everyone else who's going to be doing this series with us. We did not give one to Jared just because his style is so much unlike any of the other folks that are going to be on the podcast. I just felt it was better, or we were better served by not bothering him with a map and probably learning what it is that he looks for in all the different places that he goes. So I hope you enjoy the show as much as I did putting it on. Todd is not going to be present for any of these shows. As most of you know from listening to Todd in the past, he's definitely got his own style, and we want to save that for a show where we're just talking about Todd's style. So with that, let's get on with episode number 1 of many on public land hunting. Here is Mr. Jared Scheffler. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the White Knuckle podcast. Tonight, I am solo again, recording another show in our series on public land hunting. And I have with me on the other line a guy that probably doesn't need a whole lot of introduction, Mr. Jared Scheffler from Whitetail Adrenaline. Jared, how's it going tonight?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
It's
of course. Give Todd a hard time for not being here. I mean, good grief.
I will. He was tired. No, I'm just kidding. He's planting corn or whatever.
I know he's a busy guy. He's got a lot on his plate. So,
yeah, that's not true.
Of course, I'll give him a hard time too when I talk to him.
Absolutely. Well, and one of the reasons that I think I was telling you earlier here before we started recording that I don't have him on these shows typically is just because he is, as we all know, pretty opinionated, he definitely likes to share his opinion, and I wouldn't expect anything other than that. But you're kind of coming into this a little bit blind. Let me just catch you up to speed on what I did with the other folks that are doing this. What I did is just provided them a map. And each different person has picked, places on this map that they would like to hunt. And the reason that I didn't really think that was necessary with you is because you really hunt all over the country, don't you?
I've hunted, mainly what I hunt is the Midwest, I haven't ventured into the Northeast part of the country. That's been something that's been on my hit list for about 10 years now. Like the far Northeast, the big woods of like PA, New York, the Adirondacks, and I also haven't done northern Wisconsin. I was supposed to do northern Wisconsin last fall, and we kind of got behind on getting some bow footage. We just wanted to stay on that, and so I had to push that hunt off another year. So, there's I haven't done Michigan. That's, people that know hunting very much across, from state to state, they know Michigan's, potentially one of the most difficult states. Obviously you got your southern states like, Florida and Georgia and all those, you don't get, super good quality deer, but as far as like a pressure state on public land, I know Michigan's, right up there along with PA as being some of the most pressured stuff. Obviously here in Wisconsin, it's, those are probably the top 3 states pressure-wise on public land. There's Wisconsin, Michigan, and PA, I don't know for sure, but they're right up there. So
let's actually let's start there with really what was my first question. Would you say that probably one of your top considerations when you're looking at a place, whether it's on a Onyx map or whether it's Google, whatever, is one of your considerations pressure?
Yeah, I mean, I generally, when I'm going to a new state or a new area that I've never been to, I mean, obviously if you've hunted there before, you've got a pretty good gauge generally of what the pressure is going to be like. We've been blindsided before too, and we've went to places that we've been in the past and obviously, ran into pressure levels that were higher, than before too. So you don't ever really know for sure what you're getting into. But generally when I'm going to a new area or a new state, I mean, I'll look at how close some of the bigger cities are, some of the bigger cities, because if there's not a whole lot of public land in that area and there's, big city area, well, the chances are that public land's going to be getting hit. Anything within like a half hour, 45 minutes of a bigger city generally is going to have some pretty good pressure levels. And if it's big acreage or hard to access public land or public land that people don't realize is public land, I mean, you can still get into some really, good quality hunting, and some little nuggets and some little gems you can find within there. But generally speaking, mainly because I'm out there and I got to get content, every single year. I got to get on big deer. I got to get a multitude of encounters and situations. I'm going to be targeting or focusing on trying to find less pressure stuff just in general because, I'm not out there trying to get one big buck documented for the year on public land getting shot. I'm trying to document, a multitude of them. So, I do kind of gauge, try to, get a feel for it if I'm going into an area or a new state. I am kind of trying to, but that some of that comes with experience and just general feel too. Of sometimes you can be wrong about it too. Some of that you go off of your gut. You think you can look at a map and think, okay, I don't really think the pressure is going to be that high right here for these reasons or whatever. And you can get there and completely be like, well, I read that one wrong. It's just one of those situations that I mean, hunting's ever since I was a little boy, long before I could hunt at the age of 12. I mean, there's nothing else in my life that's ever topped it for like what I live for as far as like hobby or what I love to do or whatnot. And so it's like, as long as I've been doing it and, done so many states and so many hunts and been out there, not always hunting, but sometimes filming too, but you're there for the hunt. As many years as I've been doing it, I can still look back at a season and say, boy, I sucked that day, or boy, I sucked in that situation, or I read that wrong. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of funny. You get a lot more experience, which gives you a better feel, a lot of times about what to do in certain situations, but you'll still find that you're not always right, or you don't always read it right. We are humans. So, and we are dealing with wild, fairly unpredictable animals typically on public land. So.
Well, yeah, you're 100% correct. And as much as we'd all love to think that this is an exact science, it just isn't. And I think resoundingly, the one thing I'm hearing over and over again from doing these podcasts is there's absolutely no substitute for boots on the ground. And I guess that shouldn't come as a surprise to me, but I would guess that you're the same.
I would very much agree with that. Because it all does revolve around that. I've had, 2 years ago, I can't remember what season it was. I think we had 3 successful stocks in 5 attempts, and we were like, wow, we're getting good at this, that's pretty good to spot and stock, 3, mature or close to mature, public land bucks, we're not talking about 1.5-year-olds and whatnot. I mean, I think they were all 3+. Maybe there was 1 2-year-old in there. Anyways, we had like 3 out of 5. Well, then I think it was the following season. We had like 18 bucks that we would have shot in bow range, and we couldn't get an arrow off the bow. Like everything was going wrong. They'd get in bow range, they'd get behind the right tree, they'd come trotting through and, cruising for a doe or whatever. Just silly stuff was happening, and that's part of hunting. And so I guess going back to what you asked about boots on the ground, yeah, ultimately boots on the ground, there's nothing that can really, top that or replace that. But you get yourself into the right situations. It's kind of like you do the right things, or you got the right approach, and boom, 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 you can hit the lottery really fast several times, and then all of a sudden you could go, into a streak where it's like everything's going wrong for a little while too. You know what I mean? But boots on the ground and will help you get through that. It just might, you'll get your spurts. When it rains, it pours, good or bad. We've seen it so many times over the years where it's like you get into your streaks where when you're hot, you're hot. When you're not, you're not. I mean, and it's hunting, and you never know. You never know what day is going to be the day, what hour is going to be the hour, and so that's why, putting boots on the ground. I mean, that's time out there. I mean, a lot of people would probably go crazy spending the amount of hours I do, like when we hunt the plains state of, like, say, Kansas. A lot of people, it drive them nuts to be in a vehicle like that and put on 300 miles in a day on gravel roads and not be able to go after a big buck. Maybe see one that is on private that you can't, you can't do anything about in our situation. And on a day like that, you're thinking in your head, holy crap, most of the ground out here, most of the acreage is private ground. But we just put on 300, some of those days we've had 340, 350 miles on the vehicle. Usually we got over 200, depending on the day.
On a gravel road.
On gravel roads, yeah. I mean, we're cruising, we're hauling. We're going from place to place, from spot to spot. But all I'm saying is, you might get in a grind, and we've had 3-4 days in a row of that and never get an opportunity to even go after one. We don't get one on public, 3-4 days in a row, spend all that time in the vehicle, all those miles. It'll drive you crazy. It'll drive you mentally kind of nuts. I mean, you got to make extra Dairy Queen stops and all kinds of things just to keep your morale up. You know what I mean? I mean, you do. I mean, people, I think when people watch the Kansas stuff, the hunts, with us driving around, that's when some of this really silly talk happens in our videos.
Oh, I bet.
It's because we're so bored and we're so, like, just trying to do anything to make ourselves kind of laugh and giggle that that's what produces that, and that's when, we start heading to Dairy Queen and things like that. So, and that's a key thing right there too. Like, we keep little snacks and things in the vehicle or anything. You got to have something to keep your mental state solid, because public land hunting is a grind. And, so many people are so focused on, physical endurance so much now, I think. Yeah, that's the way I look at it. Well, I feel like mental endurance is more important overall. Just because I'm talking on a public land hunt, whether it's elk or whitetail or whatever it is, it's a grind. You'll get into your situations where day after day after day, it's a struggle. And if you don't have a strong mental endurance, it's going to be really hard to carry that weight. You know what I mean? To keep going and keep pushing yourself.
Yeah, for sure. I experienced that myself this fall. I was thinking on the way home, just knowing that I was going to chat with you tonight. I was thinking, there's a lot of times where I made it to my final destination, or where I had picked out on a map. I really didn't know what in the hell I was doing, because I didn't commit to hunting public land until probably June. And I was, going to be in Wisconsin. And so I really, I had hunted the same, 40-acre piece of timber for the last 25 years. And sure. I can remember just finally getting up in the stand and going, Oh my God, I actually made it here, and I went up a Richland County hill that was, straight up and down, and I was just happy that I made it to where I wanted to go. And so, keeping that mental focus sometimes is, well, not sometimes, all the time is a challenge, and like you're talking, the small little things that you can do to I don't know, take your brain somewhere else for a minute are probably important.
Yes, it is.
So it's safe to say that you, unlike the rest of the guys on our panel, are doing a lot of your scouting on the fly. Like I think if I were to ask all of the guys that I've interviewed so far, they're all going out in either turkey season or March or February and putting boots on the ground, whether it's Kansas, whether it's Nebraska, whatever. You're not doing any of that, right?
Correct. In fact, it's been 10 years this year since I've done any of that. And that's a true story. 10 years ago, 2008 was the first year where that was our second video. You see, our first video isn't in all public. It's a partial. It's some public, some by permission. Then our second season is when we kicked off the all public. And that season is when we actually did some pre-scouting. And I, when I was young, about the age of 14, that's when I really started doing a lot of like spring scouting. So it's not something that I've always like this. What you see going on over the last however many years in my videos, it isn't the same. Some of it is the same format of how I hunted when I was younger, but I did a lot more like pre-scouting and winter scouting and summer scouting. I used to take all kinds of drives in the summer and scope bucks out that were coming out. And, back then I hunted public and private that I could get permission. I never leased any ground or anything. I've never leased any ground, maybe $100 gift certificate at Christmas time for the farmer or something,
Sure.
One of those deals. Or, there's one farmer, I hauled him a few loads of wood and I would hunt during muzzleloader season on his farm, kind of deal. So there's something like that I do back years ago. But other than that, everything I've ever hunted, I grew up hunting a big, giant public land swamp. I used to, my grandparents say they lived, and actually part of their farm, and the DNR ended up buying and adding on to that swamp, but it was, I forget how many thousands of acres. But I knew every inch of that swamp because, every Sunday we'd go over to Grandma and Grandpa's and, the adults would play cards and stuff. Well, I'd take off and go out in that swamp, and I had a little beagle dog that would, go with me on my little deer scout missions, and I, made all these mental notes, things and stuff. And I did all that, and you can be successful doing that. Obviously, a lot of guys are. There's more than one way to skin a cat. For me, and I think how our style, when I look back over the last 10 years, I've realized that not only can that, it's pre-scouting, all that stuff can be very effective. But it can also, if a person isn't careful, it can actually be a disadvantage in a lot of ways too. And let me explain that a little bit because I didn't realize it. Basically, the reason I kind of quit doing that is because I literally, at that point in the business, I was trying to balance, somewhat of a stable job and build the business too, and I just didn't have time. I got on the road at the shows in the spring, and so I just didn't have time to get out there and do that. And looking back on it, I didn't realize this at the time, but what I found is when I didn't pre-scout and I was going into an area that I'd never been to, or going into an area or hunting a piece that I'd never been to before, I was arriving there first, today's the day I'm hunting. And I wasn't emotionally attached to it at all. I had no prior knowledge of this. So what that allowed me to do is see it clearly as it is right now, the day I'm hunting. Like, is it happening here? Is there a bunch of fresh rubs, scrapes, visuals of deer? Everything that you would look for kind of essentially in the spring that would give you indicators that maybe you want to invest your time there in the fall. Well, now I'm doing that, right on site the day I'm hunting, which allows me to see it a lot clearer, like if it's happening right there or not. And you can still do that when you pre-scout, but what I found is you begin to kind of get attached, because between spring, when you found all that sign, and fall, your mind kind of starts to imagine how things might unfold and all of that. And pretty soon you begin locking yourself down to different areas. And then, you might come there in the fall, and there might be other hunters that you didn't realize were hunting there, or it might be a higher pressure area. That sign might have been being made from deer that were on private ground, and it might be all nocturnal sign. Crops, some states, they have crops on public lands. Wisconsin doesn't really have a whole lot of that, but, a lot of times public lands in Wisconsin or any state, those deer are still going to crop, whether it's private or public. And if those crops alternate, well, that could, totally change things in the woods as well. I mean, it doesn't always, but all I'm saying is there's a lot of things that can happen from year to year, that, especially on public land, that can really change that and, change the deer's behavior. And plus, you don't know when that sign was made. And so what I've found is there's nothing wrong about it. I got a really good buddy of mine that he hunts about 4 or 5 states a year, and he's been doing it for years, and he's very successful. It's very rare for him to go on an out-of-state hunt, and he does all public and by permission stuff. So he doesn't do any leases either. He just does knock-on-door permission and public stuff, and he's very successful. Every year, every hunt he pretty much does, he gets an opportunity on a good deer, and he does a lot of pre-scouting and runs all the cameras and stuff, and he's got a very effective style. But one thing that I've learned from him is he's one of the only guys I've ever met that at a moment's notice, I mean, he can be running cameras in North Dakota and make a couple trips out there in the summer and watching deer. And if he gets there in the fall when he's ready to hunt and it don't feel right, or something doesn't sit right with him, he'll completely abandon everything right then. Like he's really good at detecting that and moving on and investing his time in trying to find, where these deer went, or a completely new area. And that's one thing. He doesn't get attached like a lot of guys or a lot of people do. So if you know that can happen, I think you can guard it. And ultimately, I think pre-scouting, if you can keep that guarded, you actually have a little bit of a leg up on my strategy, my style of just going in cold, because if you're still able to pull that plug, you got a little bit of a heads up on that area already. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I can see where, first of all, I guess a couple of thoughts entered my head. One of the things that I learned this year, that I still think there's value to winter scouting, to some extent. I don't think anybody could argue differently. But
right.
when you're there in the winter, from what I saw this year, you're looking at January stuff. You're looking at February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, and you're looking at the entire year, and you're not really seeing exactly what a given time period looks like. You're just seeing the whole picture. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You could be looking at a bunch of beds that aren't at all going to be used in
Correct.
October or November, but maybe in July and June they're like thick, and
right.
It's one thing that so, and the reason that it pops into my head is because I've got this new ground that I'm leasing, just because the stars align for me, and I had a great opportunity that I couldn't say no to. But so I did a ton of scouting, and now I've got cameras up just because I can't wait to see what deer are there, and I'm not getting any pictures. But I'm thinking, well, wait a second. All those beds are there, and all that sign was there. And then it dawned on me, like it should have, maybe they're just not using that right now.
Yeah, correct. That could very well be. Chansey, my good buddy Chansey, most of his life he's hunted private ground, and not only private ground, a lot of supreme high quality private ground. I mean,
Chancey's privilege.
Most of the ground that he hunted when he would hunt private is he would hunt ground that had at least 170 class deer that he knew was on it, and a lot of time, I mean, he's got 2 180 plus deer on other people's walls that he shot and they died on, and he couldn't go retrieve them, kind of deal. You know, he shot a lot of big deer. Anyways, he used to manage a very a hunt club down there. He's got some friends that have this hunt club, whatever. And it's a true hunt club. Like, it's like $10,000 to be able to hunt there for the year. Well, he'd run like 70, 80 cameras, and he would observe everything that goes on with all that. And we kind of joke about how I guess he's got a lot more experience with this, but he always kind of jokes, like, when it comes to like cameras and stuff, he kind of always jokes because he's random and stuff. And he goes, number one rule, he's like, deer don't like people. Okay. So, he's like, people get a picture of a big buck, and it's like they can't help themselves to go in there and check their camera and do all that, jungle gym, the whole thing. And then they wonder where the deer goes. Mm-hmm. He's like, the best thing you can do, that's the idea of a sanctuary. The best thing you can do is just stay out of there until you're actually going to hunt it. Like, just, he's there. Just give him his room. I mean, he's frequent in the area. Just, you already know where the pinch points are and stuff. Just don't invade his area. That's private land stuff or whatever. More so, a lot of times public land deer, they're used to. I think they have a little bit more tolerance. They're sharper, at detecting. Generally, they're sharper at detecting, human invasion and stuff. But I think they're a little bit more. At the same point, they're a little bit more tolerant of it. I think, as far as like, they'll bump a little ways, maybe bump out of there, but they'll be back, because they're used to that on public land a little bit more. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
they're sharp and they're aware, but yet they're more tolerant.
Absolutely.
Not at that second, but they're more willing, they're just accept that that's just, they run into people out there.
Yeah, it doesn't turn them inside out like it does maybe on a private tract. I get it.
Right.
So back to, I guess, your style. I think it's safe to say that you run and gun all the time. I don't think we'd find you sitting in a tree saddle or a stand at any point. You really are primarily spot and stalk, correct?
Correct. There is situations here and there where we get into it. It's just not the right conditions or the right situation, that we have to actually like sit there and wait. Maybe there's not a whole lot of acre done this piece, but and they're just, maybe it's a new piece we walked into and there's just a ton of fresh sign and it's all, 200 yards or 100 yards from private ground, and maybe these just looping barely and just using just a small part of that public acreage, and we just got a sense that, sneaking through here, trying to spot and stalk or catch one by still hunting isn't going to be very effective. So it's not my preferred strategy. I don't like that. Sometimes it is nice, like after you've been, sneaking around the woods, it'll wear you out. When you're sneaking around the woods, I mean, you're constantly like surveying the woods all day long, or brush or grass or wherever you're hunting. You're constantly surveying that. That will wear you out. So sometimes it is nice to have a day where it's like, you know what, the best thing we can do right here is just hunker down. So, but I get bored after about a half a day of that too. So,
do you see any common threads in terms of terrain pieces or geographical landmarks like a lake or a stream or anything like that seems to lend better to your style than it would tree stand hunting?
Generally speaking, I like stuff a little bit more open. Whether that's timber or, obviously the plains, grass, CRP, or mixed, like sometimes you get into situations where you got mixed, you got cedar trees mixed with CRP grass. Generally, I like more open areas. I love semi-open timber. I love sifting through, timber that's fairly open. The trick when you're trying to still hunt, when you haven't actually had a visual on a big buck, the trick is you got to go slow enough. The thicker the cover, obviously, the slower you got to go, because, and depending on those conditions too, if you don't have hardly any wind, well, you got to go at a snail's pace. Otherwise, they're going to hear you, before you can even see them, and they're already looking for you, and they're pinned on. They're very good at detecting exactly where that noise is coming from, and they're already pinned looking for what is that. So, you got to be able to move slow enough that they can't hear you before you can see them. Otherwise, they're already looking for you. So you can still hunt. You can stalk in really thick stuff, but depending on those conditions, and everything, you got to go at a slower pace. And, the trick to public land, one of the things that I love about the style of hunting that we have of, run and gun and on the ground like that is, one of the biggest things is you got to have a system to eliminate acreage fast, because especially when you're doing an out-of-state hunt for 5 days or whatever, maybe you've never been there before, a lot of acreage quite often is not worth your time. And that probably applies to a decent amount of private ground too, depending on the areas. Obviously, if you're in some of the pristine areas, maybe not so much, but, some of those states and areas we go to, the private land would be just, similar, as far as a lot of that acreage wouldn't be that, wouldn't be very worthy of our time. And so hunting on the ground also allows us to do that. On a 200-acre piece, when I used to tree stand hunt more, that, I might spend 2-3 days, okay, let's just say I've never hunted there before or whatever. I might go in a little ways, find a little bit of sign, whatever. And my mentality 10 years ago, when I was, a tree stand hunter more so, I've hunted on the ground since I was 16, but I did, a fair amount of tree stand hunting back then, 10 years ago still. So, my mentality would be back then, 10 years ago, I would go in, find some, go in as deep as I felt like I could and find, if I found enough sign, whatever, enough indicators that maybe I should put on the brakes and hunt here for this evening or whatever, I would do that. And then if I didn't see anything, what do you do next? You're kind of excited maybe a little bit about the sign you found. Well, then you might go a little bit deeper, investigate. You get a little bit more aggressive. Well, pretty soon you might have 3 days tied up in a piece that really wasn't worth your time in the first place. Maybe those deer, like I say, were coming from private ground or whatever. There's a lot of different variables there. And, hunting on the ground, we can go in there and we might determine that the place is not really worth our time in 2 hours or an hour or 3 hours, or we run into another hunter. It's not that big of a deal for us because we're not carrying 20 pounds, 30 pounds of gear in with us on our backs and setting everything up and trying to, it's a total different deal. We can just, there's a guy over there. We're going to go over here, or we're evacuating the whole area or whatever. What I mean? You can adapt a lot quicker. And same thing when you get a visual on a big buck. When you start to develop your skills of stalking and pursuing a deer on foot, you'll soon realize that you're holding a little bit more of the cards in your hand at that very moment, as far as you're not trying to pattern that deer or predict that deer, which obviously, especially during the ruts, is very difficult to do. You're making a decision right now. You got this visual. What am I going to do? Should I get ahead of him? Is he cruising? Do I need to get to this pinch point? Is this where he's going? Is he locked onto the doe? Can I sneak in at him like this? But pretty much, 95% of the time, you're going to make a move on that deer right then and there, and you're either going to get him or you're going to bust him trying, or he might occasionally slip through the cracks and never know that you are actually hunting him. I play cat and mouse with a big 165 class buck a few years ago in Iowa. It was in timber, and it was really difficult, conditions to actually pull off a still hunt or a spot and stock. And 4 times we found this deer over a 2-day period. He was locked down to the doe. That's why we kept being able to relocate him and find him back. And twice I had him, well, I shouldn't say twice. Twice I had him in compound range. Once was pushing the border with longbow range, but I just didn't feel super comfortable with it. And I could never get a shot on him. The situation just didn't unfold right. But that deer never knew we were hunting him. And it was really cool. It was really cool to be that on top of a big mature deer that many times, and yet he still never knew that you and a camera guy are out there, just in the fringes. So I kind of got off, maybe off topic a little bit there.
Well, you did and you didn't. I mean, and that's one of the cool things about doing these is everyone's sort of got their own experience that they can lend to us. And you said something back there that brings up a question. Hunting a 200-acre piece and it takes you 3-4 days. Is there anything that you've learned throughout this process of running and gunning and still hunting and spot and stock that helps you eliminate pieces that you, if you were to go back to tree stand hunting, would apply to that would help you eliminate things quicker?
Yeah, I think if I were to start utilizing tree stands again, I would still do a fair amount of hunting on the ground. I don't ever think about hunting tree stands because I love hunting on the ground so much. Like, even if I didn't run around with a camera, that's how I'd hunt. Just because I'm so addicted by it, like face to face with a mature buck, at eye level, you and him, you're pretty much, a lot of times fully exposed or fairly exposed. It's a rush when it all comes together. So it's totally got me addicted. But as far as if I were to utilize tree stands, I would still probably approach pretty much every hunt, every situation I would approach on the ground. And when I determined that this area is very likely, or this location is very likely worth my time, that's when I would decide, okay, I'm going to put up a tree stand here now. And I'm going to hunker down here for a couple days or whatever,
Sure.
if I had a really strong feeling, and it's kind of funny you asked that question, because about a minute before you asked that question, I was thinking about a hunt back in 2010 I did. It was in Iowa. I had never hunted this public ground, didn't have a clue what it even looked like. And, it was kind of in Chancey's neck of the woods. He'd never hunted it, but he told me, there's a few thousand acres over here. He's like, I'd start kind of here. But he was off hunting all his private ground. He'd never hunted it before, but he just knew that, there's good deer around this area and whatnot. So
Sure.
I show up, and I park my vehicle. The sun hasn't come up yet, so I don't even know what I'm getting into, okay? So I just go creeping in there, and my buddy Scott Meska, he was with me filming. I go creeping in there. First deer I see is a 165-inch buck, about 20 yards on private ground. But all the cover, he's standing in a cut bean field. All the cover is pretty much on the public side, and there all of a sudden this doe pops out too, okay? Well, they end up crossing the fence at about 35 yards, but I couldn't get a shot. Like, his doe had taken off when she crossed the fence, and he pursued. They didn't know we were there or whatever. I get him relocated. He got me pegged and took off trot and stopped. It was a rush shot, whatever, I missed. Okay. So we continued on through that piece, and we saw 2 more deer that I would have shot in a matter of a couple hours, and bumped to quite a few, does, maybe 4 or 5 does or whatever. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when I came up through there, I was like, you know what? If I was a tree stand hunter, I'd throw the stand right there. That's exactly what, so that's a good situation right there, right?
Sure.
Of where, like, okay, we went in on ground, trying to get a feel for this area and everything, and now we've determined, yes, this is a quality piece, and whatnot, and it's a, it was a perfect spot. So But, however, we come back in. What are you going to do the next day? Of course you're going to come back into that spot. I mean, it was lit up, you know?
Right.
And so we come back into the next day on foot. And now we're being pretty much twice as cautious as before because we kind of got a better feel for the area. We kind of know where we need to really put our brakes on now and everything. But it was just dead. We didn't see a single deer, you know, that I remember. I mean, maybe we saw a doe or something somewhere in there. But it was just dead. We determined that within 45 minutes to an hour it was dead. So what we do? We're on foot. Let's pull out of here. There's plenty of other acreage. Let's go check some other stuff out. We jump in the vehicle. It's probably 45 minutes later, 10, 15 miles away at a different piece. I spot like a low 140s 10 pointer. We make a quick, mad dash to getting a pinch point a few hundred yards ahead of where we thought he'd come through. And we barely got there in time. And I shot and he ducked it quite a bit, turns out, and I hit him in that no man's land. And I never did get that deer. I pursued him the whole rest of the day, and every time I seen him and whatnot, he seemed like he was doing pretty healthy. But I'm sure he lived. But so after that, I just obviously took the wind out of my sails a little bit. Well, my buddy Scott had a Kansas tag, so I was like, you know what, I don't really even feel like going hunting tomorrow or anything. Like we spent the whole next day looking for the deer and stuff and whatnot. And so we took off to Kansas. I filmed him for 3-4 days there or whatever, and we didn't have a lot of time to play with. And he's like, you know what, let's drive back, and on our way through Iowa, we'll hunt for, at least part of the day. He had to get back for that night or whatever, or the next morning.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, we'll hunt. So what do we do then? We went back into the original first spot, okay?
Right.
Because we kind of figured, maybe it was so dead because we blew all those deer out. Maybe that's why it was so dead. You don't know. I mean, I've seen areas that were hot, and they never knew anybody was, we were there or anything, and then the next day they're cold. There's no explanation why, but they are. Spots go hot and cold from day to day sometimes. Anyways, we go back in there. Now we know a lot more about this spot. Like I say, we're to put the brakes on and whatnot. And we're creeping up through there. And it's terrible conditions for hunting on the ground. I mean, it's a frosty morning, no wind. It's like, I even made a comment in the video, like, I have no idea, like, this is not going to work. Like, this is a crapshoot, And we're tiptoeing along, and, I could hear a couple deer up ahead, and there's a couple small bucks that ended up, they were sparring. Well, we got into about 40 yards on them. Well, it was about a half hour later, this 140, 45-inch 8-pointer come up the line and boom, smoked him, and right there was that tree that would have put that tree stand in. However, so we left that area. We learned a lot that first time going in there. The second day, because we were on the ground and it was so cold, it was really easy for us to adapt. See, if we would have went in there and hung up tree stand the next day, now we would have been kind of more locked down to it. Like we probably would have hunted that whole morning and, ate the whole morning up there, But we pulled out, adapted quick to the situation, like it's dead, let's go check something else out. We let that whole area cool off, went to Kansas, came back, slept in there. Now when you were to put on the brakes, boom, it all came together. So all I'm saying is I think there is really good application. I think that a person can do both and be very effective. There's a lot of situations where, you're hunting on the ground and you're coming across different pinch points, different, you might, a lot of times in late pre-rut in Wisconsin or middle of October, what I would do is I'd cruise at a fairly high pace, not trying to kill a deer, but just a lot of these new places that I was going into, all I would be doing is trying to figure out where the doe bedding areas were, and then during the rut, once the rut started kicking in, that's when I'd know, like, hey, I need to put on the brakes when I'm still hunting through here because the does, there's some does at bed right up here. And that strategy worked really good for us on the ground. Now, from a tree stand perspective, I'd have done the same thing, done all that in October from the ground. Now they had a week or 2 weeks to cool off. Does a lot of times they'll be back in there in a few days, maybe even the next day kind of deal,
Mm-hmm.
But they had a little bit of time to cool off. And now, you could have went in there and hung a tree stand and, you might have half a dozen of these doe bedding areas pinpointed and located. And now you could bounce from one to one Treestand location-wise. So I think there is a really good strategy that, like I said early on, there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's a lot of different strategies that can and do work for different hunters. And so I think you can have a balance of both and be very effective.
Do you think that even whether it's public or private, that sometimes we all overthink it? And just
I think overthinking in general happens a lot in hunting because we're trying so hard. It's kind of like when you're chasing a girl so hard that there's just no way that you're going to get it together. Kind of, like maybe that's a bad application or but there is some truth to that. I think where you're trying so hard and you're overthinking everything you're doing to where it starts to blur your reality maybe a little bit about what's going on in the situation, and what to do next. It's just like I kind of mentioned early on too that I've been doing this how many years, hunting hard and all this, and it's like every season I can look back and see like, man, we should have known better than to do this or that. Well, a prime example last season is your timing. Time is so crucial when you're hunting big deer on the ground, big bucks on the ground, or any deer for that matter on the ground. And we had a number of situations, and I've seen this over the years, where we've got a situation, big buck on a doe or big buck, he doesn't appear to be going anywhere, whatever. And it's really easy to think you have all the time in the world. And when you spot a big buck and you decide you're going to make a move or make a play or you need to get to this location, you need to go with your gut. And, oftentimes, especially because there's two of us out there, one guy filming and one guy hunting, oftentimes we end up pitter-pattering for 10 minutes, like, what do you think about going this way? Or how about this? And a lot of times you end up going with your gut, and then you end up realizing you're 2 minutes too late. And if you just skipped all the pitter-pattern and second-guessing your gut on what to do, you'd have been there and you would have killed the deer. I mean, it happened to us on 165, 70-inch deer, right off the top of my head that I can think of from last year, Really? And I know there's a handful of situations. Yeah, I know there's a handful of situations like that where we hee-hawed around, just for a few minutes, and that cost us that opportunity. And if we just went with our gut, once you get a decent amount of experience, it seems like around 80% of the time, your gut is right in a situation about what to do, like when it comes to like how you should approach the situation of a stalk on this deer or whatever, about 80% of the time. So you should just go with your gut and make it happen and move as fast as you can that you're comfortable and you're not going to bump that deer. For instance, if that deer there's no way he can see you, no way he can smell you, you need to go as fast as you can. And then, if you get into that situation where, it's going to be a little bit hairy and you really need to put on the brakes, now you've bought yourself a little bit of time so you can go at that appropriate slow snail's pace to get where you need to get. Sometimes, you might be able to get, you might be able to go from 500 yards to 100 yards of this deer really fast, and then that last 50 yards you need to crush might take you an hour or 2 hours to get there. You know what I mean? And if that makes sense. And every second matters in that game, because I've seen it so many times where it's like, if I had another minute, you know what I mean? So not to get up on a rambling tangent about that, but that's one thing that I've seen a lot.
Yeah. One thing that I definitely want to ask you, being that you are primarily hunting out of state, but you're still in the Midwest. What kind of resources do you use the most, either out in the field or from home prior to going on these hunts? I mean, I'm guessing that you're looking at some of this public from the air. What is it that what kind of resources do you use? Are you using Google Maps? Are you using Onyx Map? What kind of things do you find yourself looking at the most?
If the state has a good resource, like some states do have Google Earth maps for their that mark their public hunting areas. Obviously, that's the best. because you have the information coming from the state, and you have it on Google Earth, which is a really good platform even when you don't have good cell service, and it still will update and show you your location and all that. So, yeah, ultimately you do that. If a state doesn't have a good system, then I'll use like Ozonics, and going off of that, I mean, all that information, you gotta really watch it too, because 999 times out of 1,000 it's accurate, but whether it's Ozonics or whether it's the state's information, it's still done by human people, so it still can be wrong,
Right. We all found that out the hard way once or twice.
Oh yeah. I've seen I've seen Google Earth maps from the state that don't have refuge areas marked, and I've seen, I ran into a couple situations with Ozonics as well, and it came down to where they got the information from the state, from the county, at the county level, the GIS department. There's errors and glitches on their end, so therefore Ozonics then got that information wrong. They're out in Montana. How do they know if it's not labeled right from the county?
Right.
But, I mean, you hunt enough public land, you go across enough states and different situations. And, I ran into 2 situations last year in Iowa that they weren't labeled anywhere on the DNR website. There was no signs up anywhere on them. And Chansey, there's water at both of these locations. There were bodies of water. And Chansey at Bass, he does a ton of fish. He fishes all these different lakes in Iowa or whatever. And he had seen public duck blinds out there when he'd been fishing. So he, felt pretty strong that you could public hunt it. Well, we're tracking down the warden and the sheriff's departments and all this and that. And it turns out both of those situations, yeah, you can hunt them. There's no signs. There's nothing on the DNR website. They're not DNR owned, and that's why they weren't on the maps. But there are situations and little hidden gems and stuff. It turns out there's other people that knew about them and were hunting them too. But there are different situations out there that are like that. A lot of people sometimes think that the only thing that there is for public land hunting opportunities is like your typical wildlife management areas or your state forests or whatever. But there are, there's getting to be a lot of different programs and situations.
Right.
Some states have school lands and things like that. So, but you do have to, be a little bit cautious with that stuff. I mean, the biggest thing is when you don't see signs, I mean, you got to be, extra cautious of that and follow through on some things,
Right.
If you checked out, our last gun video, I made the mistake of, going, off of my gut a lot more of what I've seen with different situations and going off of my experience with Ozonics and how accurate it's been. And it turns out that it was not accurate. It was not right. So, which, made a big messy ordeal, which is in video. But anyways, glad that's all done.
Sounds like a fun time.
Oh yeah. Well, the funny thing, I've had a number of different people that have ran into similar situations. In fact, I actually had a guy that recognized the one parcel in that video, and had at a show had told me that he had actually been on that as well, and then realized something maybe wasn't right and did some follow up on it, and he found out that it wasn't. So it's actually kind of, makes me feel better to know that other people, not that it makes me feel good to know that other people have ran into that situation, but makes me feel like, okay, I'm not the only one that's, ran into, but.
Well, yeah, I mean, stuff happens. I hunted a lot of MFL this year, and I had two, and anybody who's listened to a whole lot of our shows has probably heard this story. So I apologize if it's getting redundant. But I had two people pull guns on me, and had it not been for the amount of time that I spent in a squad car in the front seat, I probably would have lost my mind on one of them in particular. But crazy stuff happens out there, and I think probably the best advice that anyone could give is to just stay calm. I mean, if somebody's, don't freak out, don't yell at anybody. I managed to avoid getting shot both times. Both times I was in the right, but still, it really doesn't matter at that point who's right or wrong, especially when a firearm's involved. If you know,
Right. People lose their minds a little bit. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about with that MFL stuff, because years ago, before they even had the online mapping for it, you'd have the list, which they still got the list as far as I know. I think they still got the list. So that's all you had to go off of years ago. They didn't have the online mapping to give you a reference or anything like that. So I literally spent probably 300 hours over the course of a couple of years plotting like 7 different counties, every single MFL. I did them on Google Earth. I created the maps on Google Earth, but I'd cross-reference, with a GIS page or a plat book, all the coordinates. So that way I had it right on my phone, Google Earth, and then I'd keep the book in my vehicle with all the coordinates, and I had all the plat books in that, it was a 3-inch binder. And I had to pull it out for a warden once. There's a couple situations with, police got called or whatever.
Sure.
It's like we were always in the right,
Right.
And, but yes, I know exactly what you're talking about with what you got to deal with. For those people that haven't ever hunted those MFL lands, they don't probably realize what we're talking about, but it can get a little bit hairy sometimes. I mean, it's truly open for anybody to hunt. There is no, but it's like you still get people that are kind of crazy, and
for sure.
So, as far as getting back to as far as resources outside of that, I don't get too hung up on aerials and all that. Not like I used to. Usually if I'm going to target a state or an area, generally if I've already been to that area, I don't even look at it until I'm an hour away or whatever, or I'm actually there. And then I pull it up and I just start going from piece to piece. A lot of times when I pull into a new area, I'll spend the first part of that day or the entire full day driving around every single piece of public land that I can in that day. And I'm looking for a visual, but I'm also looking for situations that, there's a lot of those, situations just because of the terrain and everything that you can't really survey sometimes so much from the road. But, what you can do is you can get pressure levels, get a general feel for what's going on there pressure-wise, get a general idea like, okay, there's some crops out here, or there's some crops just off the public on a private, you might be utilizing it, And that first day, a lot of times I'll just spend trying to figure out where I might want to invest my time after, from there on out. I don't like to go just pull up generally to an area like the hunt that I described to you where we went in cold back in 2010. That was a fluke deal. What happened there going in there. Generally, I get to an area, I'll spend that first day just scoping everything out, even if I've only got 4 or 5, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to effectively eliminate a lot of that acreage, like I said.
Right.
And then spend, I'd rather spend, if I have 5 days to hunt, I'd rather spend 20% of my time, 80% of the ground, and spend 80% of my time hunting the top, what I feel is the top 20% of the ground or whatever. Does that make sense? And
absolutely.
And now I throw the odds a lot more in my favor. Yeah, I'm not out in the woods that first day, and I probably drove through the night, and I'm sick of being behind the wheel, but I know that that's pretty important to do that, So even if I've been to the area before, a lot of times I'll spend that first part of that day, and obviously I'm going to start out, probably where I left off, where it was the best or the hottest last year. I'm cautious about it. I don't like to jump into the idea of just because it was hot there last year, it's going to be this year, because I see it all the time. Places go dead from year to year. I see it on a daily basis. It was hot yesterday, it's cold today. And, one thing years ago, we started talking about it just amongst ourselves, like treat each day as its own. If you get in there and it's ice cold and you don't feel it, just because it was hot yesterday get the hell out of there. Maybe come back, maybe burn back the next day or a couple days later. But for now, right now, the day you're hunting, don't waste all your time there. If it's dead, get out and go invest your time in something else, and then pop back in, and maybe it'll be hot in a day or two, kind of deal. So we do that a lot. We had a hunt last year where the year prior, so the newest bow video that came out, there's a lot of situations where we were on some good caliber deer and just things weren't coming together for us. And there was this one particular location. It was like every time we'd peek our heads, over this little knob and down into this valley, it was just like stupid how many times we'd pop over there and there'd be a shooter caliber or a borderline shooter caliber deer in there, right? It was ridiculous. I don't know, 80-90% of the time, okay? And now this last year, we probably popped our heads over that thing, peeking around for, 30, 40 times, a few times a day kind of deal. And there was never a single, I don't even know if I saw a year and a half. I did see one year and a half year old that I can think off the top of my head. Nothing even close to shooter wise. Not a 2-year-old, nothing. Not that a 2-year-old is a shooter, but I'm just saying that's a situation right there that, and the closest crops are, 500-600 yards away from that whole area, at least. That'd be the closest field, so that's all I'm saying is they can go cold. Now this year it could be, rocking hot again, and it can do that from a daily basis. So that's one thing that I love about, not trying to get back on the ground, level, but that's one thing that I like is you can adapt so fast, like, oh, it's cold, we're out of here. Let's go check this out. Let's go check that out, so.
Well, it definitely affords you a few more opportunities to at least put yourself in the game, so to speak, than what sitting in a tree stand all day does. I don't know. I can see where it would get kind of addictive. I don't necessarily know if it's me, but it definitely sounds intriguing. Maybe Todd will let me do that this year when we go down to Iowa. He'll let me just. I'm going to draw an Iowa tag this year. What are the chances he's going to do that?
Cool. Yeah. I don't think he's going to let you ground pound on his ground. And you know what? And small acreage private like that. When I'm talking about all this ground hunting, I'm talking on a public land level. I'm not talking, hey, go trounce around your 40 acres that you hunt that's private and locked up. I'm not saying that that's a good strategy for that situation. But what I will tell you is, I had a farm that I hunted 10 years ago that, other hunters could hunt too and whatnot. But, when it got to around the rut, a lot of times I would end up on the ground, but I didn't want to, in the earlier part of the season, I'd play the passive card and not try to bump them and get them too, not get them too riled up, kick
Sure.
them off the property and whatnot. But once rut hit, I completely 180, and now I'm hunting on the ground a lot. And it was very effective doing that, even, on a private land level, because, the rut is the rut, man. And they don't, once the rut hits, they don't care about rubs, scrapes, all that. And the other thing is when they're locked down, you know how it is. When it gets to lockdown stage, sitting in a tree stand is really tough because you got all these pictures flooding in from people that, Yeah, but there's also a lot of hunters out there. You got a lot of hunters out there, and you get these fluke situations. I don't want to say fluke, but you get these situations where the doe comes through with the buck. But overall, a lot of times during that lockdown, you can sit all day and it's just dead. It feels so dead. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
lockdown. Well, when you're on the ground like that, you're just keeping a lot more of you're keeping the ball a lot more in your court as far
Right.
as the outcome of that hunt. Whether you got a visual on a big one or not, by covering ground, by you're not depending on when you go sit, in a tree stand, sit in a ground blind, sit even on the ground in a stationary location, any stationary location, when you're just sitting there waiting, it's completely, especially during the rut, it's completely just, I don't want to say hit or miss, but it's completely leaving everything up to what the deer decide they're going to do. When it's you on the ground, though, you are deciding, hey, I'm going to sift up through here, and you're trying to make things happen. You're I don't know. I don't necessarily have the right words for it, but I think you understand where I'm going with this.
I do.
You're controlling a little bit more of that outcome, and
exactly.
We've killed a couple of bucks by accident doing this strategy. That now during lockdown stage, we've actually started to implement it. Once we realize lockdown's hit and it's dead, sometimes we'll just walk at a normal walking rate right through the woods until we bump one on a doe. And a lot of times they don't go far. When you bump a big buck, I don't care if it's a mature buck or what, if they're on a doe, a lot of times they don't go far. 150, 400 yards max. I'm talking like wooded terrain or somewhat, I'm not talking plains deer. They might run for a couple, 3 miles. That's a different deal. But
okay.
In that kind of situation, they don't go far. They don't want, and a lot of times mature bucks, big mature bucks, in my experience, they don't really want to go real far if they've got the coverage. So if they want to go a little ways, put a little distance, but they don't want to get too carried away and get way out there. So, what you can do in that situation, what we've done, is just put the brakes on for a half hour, let them kind of forget about you. But now at least you know what, there's a really high probability in this, small little pie-shaped area, because a lot of times the general direction you see them running when they're locked down with a doe, they're usually kind of in that same general direction. Like, outside of rut, like say during gun season, you bump a big buck, he's solo, whatever, yeah, he's doing the looping stuff and all that, and you're dealing with that. But during the rut, when they're locked down on a doe, a lot of times when you see them disappear, the general direction they're going, usually they're not too far off from that. But now hey, somewhere up there within 400 yards in this sliver of a pie-shaped area, this buck is probably going to be with this doe. And I haven't had one yet that's really remembered us. Like, I don't want to say that they didn't remember us, but they've kind of just forgot about us. After you give them a half hour, 45 minutes, whatever, they've kind of forgot about it. You see it all the time. You bump a buck on a doe, and it's like, yep, there's a hunter. We got to get out of here. And they're 200 yards out running across the field or whatever, and he's heading her off, trying to keep her from going this way or that way or whatever. He's already like, whatever, that's old news. That's yesterday's news. Yeah, there's a guy over there. Forget about him. Back to you, babe. That's his mindset.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And then pretty her mind is thinking about like where she wants to go to get away from this buck or take this buck or what, or not take this buck. But you know what I mean? Like, and they do. They just kind of forget about it a little bit. So that can be a strategy to use during lockdown. Lockdown, when you're trying to spot deer from, like, say, the vehicle in semi-open, like let's say you got grass and mixed cedars and brushy stuff and little pockets of woodlots mixed in there, it can be pretty tough to spot those deer just without getting in that jungle during lockdown. A lot of times they get them hunkered into some spot where hopefully they're not going to run in other bucks. A few years ago, I kind of learned this trick too, is you know when lockdown hits when you aren't seeing the small 1.5-year-olds running around because they're all satelliting a big buck that's probably on a doe somewhere, so they aren't cruising either because they don't know better than just leave the situation because they're never going to have a chance, but they just can't help it, and they'll spend all day lingering around, right? Well, a few years ago, it was pretty much locked down. We weren't seeing much, and I rattled, which I don't do a lot of rattling, but I ended up hitting the horns, whatever, and I rattled in 3 bucks, all came from the general direction, and I was like, you know what? There's a shooter buck up there. And those are all satellite bucks that have been waiting for their chance, whatever. And they were just bored and they came over. Because they all went walking back in that general direction, too. So obviously something was going on over there,
Right.
And we did a loop. Long story short, it took 8 hours from that point. But we finally ended up, landing an arrow in this buck. Getting this buck spotted with the doe, the main buck that was up there. And we lost visual on him a couple of times, had to make a couple loops, so it was a long ordeal, and it was in woods. And, there was 3 other satellite bucks the whole time around there, too, so it was a lot of eyeballs, and that's why, it took a while to do it. But, it worked. So that's another strategy. When you're hunting on the ground like that, okay, we rattled in a few different bucks. They all came from general direction. There's probably something up there. You're on the ground, you're making that happen. Okay, let's go investigate. From a stationary perspective, you're probably not going to do that. You're probably just going to hunker down and hope something comes by. Like, wow, I rattled in 3 bucks. Cool, or whatever. Well, I know in that situation that deer was never going to come by there because they never did, and I shot them with half-hour light left, and they were just about heading out to this field. So, So all I'm saying is, and I can think back to several years ago, we had a situation with a big buck that we called the 18-pointer. I missed him, hit a stick, and shouldn't have probably taken a shot anyways. There ended up being a lot more sticks than I thought. And anyway, the next day it was my buddy's day to hunt, Scott's day to hunt. I ran the camera. We go in there. Now I probably would have hung a tree stand in there by habit, once I determined that. But we were hunting on the ground. We hunkered down. Hour or 2 went by. We didn't see much, and it was like, you know what? Let's go cruising around this woods. Let's still hunt through here and see if we can, find him. Well, it turns out, a couple hours later, we end up spotting this big buck up on the ridge, this big one that I had, missed or whatever. And for people that have seen that video, they probably know which one I'm talking about. He ends up, this spike buck or something, fork or whatever, starts chasing a doe behind us, and we're probably 400 yards from this big deer. Well, it's one of those days where it's super quiet out, and this big buck hears all that run, and he knows what's going on, and he literally comes right down and falls right into our laps, and terrible ending to the story. My buddy ended up hitting him in no man's land, which is pretty common from the ground level, especially on a tense deer, which he wasn't really that tense, but that does happen. But another guy ended up getting him about a month later. But that was another situation right there where, and I know Scott and I said it that day, like, you know what, if we'd have hauled tree stands in here, we didn't ever, because we would have had to haul all that back out. There's no way. We would have decided, hey, we're going to go, still hunt through this woods. So that's another example of, you're keeping more of those cards in your deck by doing that.
Sure. Sure.
So
is it fair to say, and I know I've taken a bunch of your time, so I'll ask just this one last question and then give you a chance to say anything else that you'd like to say. Is it fair to say that you've learned a lot through this whole process of running and gunning and doing the spot and stalk on the whitetails in terms of, what it is that different deer are doing on a given day? Like you've learned to see, for instance, like I think back and I remember you saying that, you might have, jumped a buck and he was just on the circuit versus him being with a doe. Do you feel like you've learned more about them because of all the different situations you've been that you wouldn't have been afforded to be in while you were in the air versus on the ground?
Yeah, for sure. You definitely. I've had actually quite a few people that have taken up hunting on the ground and have actually told me those exact things right there, that they're like, you know what, a lot of them end up saying, you know, I didn't kill one this last fall, but I learned more than I've ever learned. And, you know, I had so many situations, and it's almost unanimous. Most of those people end up telling me I had more encounters and more situations than I've ever had. And they're totally addicted and hooked on it. But yeah, when you're out there, you know, hunting on the ground like that, because you're covering so much more acreage and you're diving into these different locations and these different spots and you're going from place to place, you're seeing so many more situations, you know, than you would when you're hunting stationary from one location. So just because that you're having a lot more of those situations fall into play in different terrains and, you know, going from place to place, you're going to get a lot more experience because of that, you know. And
right.
Yeah, it's, you would think, you know, you know, like for myself, like I've done this so many years or whatever, you'd think, you know, you hit a point where it's like, you just know you have the right answer for everything all the time. And the fact of the matter is, as many years as I've been doing this, and, you know, it's like I can look back at a season and be like, you know what, we needed to, you know, more of those situations we needed to go off of our gut on and quit wasting time or whatever it might be. So, and it is hunting, and you're dealing with wild animals, and, you know, they're unpredictable especially in public land situations. And so you don't, no matter how experienced you get, you're not always going to have, in my opinion, you're not always going to have the right answer for every situation. But, you know, the more situations that come your way, the more experience you get, the better sense I think your gut reaction and your gut feeling about what to do. You know, when you're hunting deer on the ground, you know, it's just like you can only read so much information or whatever before what you kind of said earlier about getting boots on the ground. That's where you get that experience that gives you your gut feeling about different situations of what to do, you know. And go ahead.
Do you think it would make you a better tree stand hunter today?
Because I hunt on the ground, because I've hunted so much on the ground?
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. And I think one of the biggest advantages I think I would have is because I've learned how easy it can be to get attached to locations and spots when you're hunting stationary locations, especially when you're carrying a lot of gear in, like a tree stand setup. I've come to realize how, looking back on it, how easy it was to get locked down in different situations. Imagine how things were unfolding. When you're going out there on the ground like our style, you don't do as much of the imagining how things are going to unfold and locking yourself down to those situations. You're kind of surveying it with a little bit, I think, more of a clear mind about like what's happening right now. And
sure.
Just because you're so free spirit, you know? I mean, when I'm out there, pretty much the only thing I have is my bow, my quiver, obviously my arrows in it, and binoculars. That's pretty much it, you know. I mean, during the rut, you know, quite often I'll throw the antlers on, or, you know, I got a belt that they just tuck into on my waist. But all I'm saying is I'm packing light, you know, and that keeps me very mobile. And a lot of times too, I don't like calling. Unless nothing's happening or I got a big buck that's on private that I think I can coax over. If I can do that, he's a wild animal. You know, I'm going to try that. You know what I mean? Other than that, I don't typically like to call a lot. You know, I've called some deer in, you know, we've snort wheezed some in, you know, and we've definitely rattled some bucks in and whatnot. But generally speaking, I want a visual, and I don't want the deer to ever know I'm there. Because as soon as I start calling, I was just cutting footage last night. I got a buddy from Tennessee, he drew Iowa. Okay. And he was out there with my buddy John that was filming him, and he hasn't hunted that much on the ground, and he had kind of told me, that he didn't know how confident he felt about it and whatever, but he's fairly fit and whatever. And I was like, oh yeah, you got it, and you can do it or whatever. Well, I was just cutting this stuff last night. He got on this 165 70-inch, really stud deer for public land, and he got into 50 yards on this deer, and this deer was locked down with a doe. And of course, when I'm cutting the footage, because I hadn't seen it, but when I'm coming across the footage, of course, I'm thinking about like what I'd be doing right now in this situation. And I was afraid that he might do this, exactly what he ended up doing. And he realized when he did it that it was probably wrong. He kind of admitted it, like, I wish I'd have done this, which we've all been there. Just like I said, like last
Oh, God,
season,
yeah.
I can look back and I can be like, you know what, why didn't we pitter-patter around? We should have done that. So I'm not knocking what he did there, but he got to 50 yards on this deer. This deer is clearly locked down with a doe, and he had a decoy very similar to what mine is there with him, and he ended up, the deer was in some weeds, and they had one cedar tree on this knob, and they were tucked behind it, and he ended up, this buck was growling and everything. I mean, crazy, like, and you don't hear that a lot out there. I've been out there a lot.
No.
You don't hear that kind of growl noises like, what the hell is that?
Right.
Well, he was doing,
They just aren't vocalizing like that very often.
Yeah, he was aggressive. He was pissed off, and he was doing that. And my buddy thought that he could maybe coax him out of those weeds. And so he started tooting on his grunt tube and snort wheezing. And, not that a snort wheeze is bad. I do like snort wheeze every now and again. It's the right situation. But I was hoping what he was going to do is leave the cameraman at the cedar tree in a situation where he could maybe film it and creep up there about another 20 yards with that decoy, just belly on the ground, not ever let him know he's there. And then when he's looking away, pop that decoy up and then snort wheeze at him, because now he's in his comfort zone. And, not saying that would work, but what ended up happening is shortly after he grunted, within a minute or whatever, and done all that, all of a sudden the doe, took off out of there. So very likely she didn't like something. Maybe they both didn't like something, but, I got a feeling that's what it is. And I personally, I just thought about it as I came across that, because I don't do, like I said, I don't do a lot of calling. I like to lay quiet on them generally. And until I'm in comfort zone, until I break that threshold of where, if I'm using the decoy, if I pop that decoy up and I'm in that threshold where I think they might come in to run me off, then I'll throw a snort wheeze at them or something. In a situation like that I will. But generally I like to lay quiet. But anyways, I don't know if that would have worked, but it was just one of them deals that I think he realized it after the fact, and he hasn't had as much experience with the decoy and on the ground like that. So you go through those learning stages and everything. So I think he learned quite a bit through that whole hunt. So I'm kind of excited to actually see the footage from the next couple days after that, because I know he got on that deer a couple more times, and he was very close. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot for taking all the time, and we could probably go on and on forever. I can't wait to see this year's videos. Speaking of that, if you would tell our listeners, how they can find you other than at the million different trade shows you're at during the spring. What's the best way to get your newest videos or any of your videos?
We got them all on our website. Otherwise, we got quite a few bow shops and dealers and stuff. We're working on a new website right now, and hopefully by late summer we'll have that up, and we'll probably have our dealers page up by then too. But like we've got actually, like in Wisconsin, we've got quite a few bow archery shops and stuff that carry our videos and have been carrying them for years. So we've got those. Otherwise, we got them online at whitetailadrenaline.com. And then right now we're shooting for, I kind of chuckle when I say this, right now we're shooting for having the new videos out around that first week of August is what we're hoping to get our lives back on track. Obviously last year, they didn't come out till like October 10th or something. We just had a lot of setbacks and whatnot in production. And this is, again, another pretty massive project. I'm probably going to wish we had a little bit more time on it. But, we're pushing really hard right now. And so only about 18,000 clips to go through this year. It's somewhere around that. Yeah, no, I'm not kidding you. I didn't realize there were that many. And then I just happened to look at the chronological order. We start them at 0 for the cameras. And I know just between the two main cameras, we were just shy of 15,000 clips. Well, I know that we got another 3,000 clips between all the other POV cameras and our other two semi-main cameras. So I know we're 18,000 plus 4K clips that we got to edit and go through every single one of them. We go through them all. So it's a massive project. It's probably going to be a 3,000 pushing 3,000 hour project this year. So
wow.
It takes a lot of work to make it come together. Someday we actually kind of want to do a short documentary on it, as far as what goes on behind the scenes as far as that goes, because it literally is. It owns your life when you get into those stages.
Hey, thanks again, everybody, for tuning into the White Knuckle podcast. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed recording it. Jared's definitely a ton of fun to listen to and certainly a wealth of knowledge, and you cannot argue with his and his crew's results. With that, I'm going to get to closing out the show today. Again, I want to remind you this is episode number 1 in a series of what will likely be 5 or 6 different shows on public land hunting. I want to encourage any of you that have questions, please put your questions on our Facebook page, and we will try and ask as many of those questions as possible. If you don't put them on there and we don't ask them, sorry, we wouldn't have known. So just do us a favor and put any questions that you might have right on our Facebook page, and we will do our best to ask them to each of the different guests. I believe next up is going to be Mr. Scott Buckley, and then after that we will have the guys from the Hunting Public, and after that it'll be Dan Infault, and after that Curtis Sable, and after that Lucas Psycho. So there's lots and lots of different styles and lots of opinions to come, and I'm really excited to bring them to you. So with that, I'll remind everyone that the sponsor of this show, Ozonics Hunting, has kind of a new deal this year. They're manufacturer ship direct, and what really that means to you is that they can offer you different deals than what they've offered you in the past. Like, for instance, the one that they're allowing us to offer our listeners, and that is on their page. It's www.ozonicshunting.com/WKP. If you go to their website, www.ozonicshunting.com/WKP, and check out the deal that they've set up for you, our loyal listener, you'll see what they've got to offer this month, and it's going to change throughout the summer here. So I'd encourage anyone that's listening to go ahead and check that out. So with that, again, do us a favor, put a review on iTunes. We can definitely use any reviews that you can give us. So we would appreciate that. If you listen to it on Stitcher, please give us a review there. If it's Google Play or iHeartRadio or any of those, please give us a review. We can't get better at what we're doing if we don't know what it is we're doing wrong. So with that, I'll just say thanks again for listening. I hope you have a happy and safe Memorial Day week. I guess that's it. Jason out.